Okay, so good morning. Thank you very much for joining us in this session, which is about financial sustainability for European alliances. My name is Raúl Ramos, and I'm chairing this session as a person in Charm Alliance who has also been involved in the finance group together with other colleagues that are also present here in the room. Sorry for the delay. The previous session just take a bit more time than expected, but we will try just to finish on time because also some of our speakers have also other commitments, so we will try to finalize at 1. So let me introduce the 3 speakers that we have in this session. The first one is Thomas Isterman. He's here close to me. Thomas is the Director for Governance, Funding and Public Policy Developments within European University Alliance. So thank you very much, Thomas, for being here and for the presentation. Then we also have 2 representatives of other alliances different than CHAN, who are also joining us online. So thank you very much also to Emily Palmer, who is the Secretary General for Union Europa. So thank you, Emily, for joining. And we also have Bernd Thiel from who is the Deputy Director for the European Campus from also to Bernd for participating. Okay, so the structure of the session is going to be the following. We are going to have like a keynote speech from Thomas, about 30 minutes, and then we'll have also the presentation by Emily and Bernd of around 15 to 20 minutes. Then I will try also to give you some input from our progresses in CHAN, but also trying to relate to the previous exposition. And then we'll have, if we all adjust to time, about 10 to 15 minutes for general discussion for the attendees here and also for those who are following the session. Okay, so thank you very much. So Thomas, the first is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ramos, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the financial sustainability of the European University Alliances. It's a topic that's certainly very interesting, and I will try to approach it with using data that we have selected at the European University Association over the past years. So what I'm trying to do is also show how financial sustainability is actually linked to the big question that you're discussing over the next 2 days, the governance of the university alliances. And I will do so by using comparative data. So maybe we could move to the next slide, thanks. Showing a little bit the diversity of governance and financial autonomy, because that has also a very important impact on the financial sustainability in long term. And I will also go a little bit outside, more on system level, showing the diversity of funding systems that your different universities are set in. And then I will relate to some challenges that we have identified in a work that we do on the governance models of European universities and what the consequences are for financial sustainability. I will use for some of the examples the CHARM Alliance, and hopefully this will be then at the end come together and provide also some input for your discussions and for the future. Just a few words about the European University Association. We're the largest organization representing universities in Europe. We have over 850 members in 48 countries, 2 types of members, individual universities, but also national university associations. We have 34 of them, and we work on the full mission of universities, from learning and teaching, research and innovation, but also on the whole framework conditions and what is necessary for universities that they can deliver the main mission. And of course, the European University Alliance is also something that is of high interest to us. Basically, most of our members, or a great part of our members, is also a member in a university alliance. I will draw on 3 data sources. So if you're interested later on to look at that in more detail, it's available on the slides. One is from our University Autonomy Scorecard, where we compare legal frameworks of universities in up to 30 higher education systems. We're just about to update this data. And some new data will come out in the course of the year. The second data source is our public funding Observatory. It's an annual monitoring tool where we monitor funding towards universities, also in 30 higher education systems. And the third data source is the study that we did on is within the framework of evolving governance models, where we did a zoom in onto the governance of the European alliances and how that connects to the institutional governance. If you could move to the next slide, please. So here you can see, I'm not going to go through all of it, but this is the data from our university scorecard, and I've used the Charm Alliance systems just on organizational questions, the organizational indicators that we have there to show the diversity of the frameworks and how they might then impact on how you make decisions. So that this ranges from how you select the leadership of the institution and to the inclusion of external members into the governing bodies, how you can create academic structures, legal entities. And here you can see already, I mean, this is a very simplified structuring from you have autonomy to don't, and a sort of middle way of where you have certain limitations. So here you can see at a glance, already the systems is very different, and the situation in your specific institutions might again be different from the system level because there are different legal frameworks from time to time. So just to give you a snapshot on the complexity, but of course, those are very important questions. Who are the decision makers at the institutions? How do they get there? And what are the competencies also in relation to making decisions on strategy and funding, the two key points, I think, for this. Other very important part is I want to reflect a little bit on the different governance structures and governing bodies existing in the different systems. And here you have three key questions that are important to understand. The first one is the structure. The second one is the size of the different governing bodies. And the third one is the membership. And around all of that is the question, what are the competencies of these different bodies? And again, if I take the example of Charm, with currently 5 systems involved, you have a huge diversity. So if I take the University of Barcelona, it's a sort of dual governance structure with a council and a senate, with large memberships, so council up to 60, as I understand, and senate up to 270 people involved from around the university community. Let's say on the other end of the spectrum, I will classify Utrecht University with a sort of very small executive board, 3 to 4 people if you include the student contribution, and then you have a supervisory board, also 5 members coming from the outside, and the others are sort of, I would say, somewhere in between. Ireland, Trinity, a unitary structure, if you want to speak, because the Senate does not really have financial decision-making powers, but a much smaller number of people in there. Again, Ireland is also just ahead of a reform, so that will change again the governance structures. So you can see very different decision-making constructions in these systems, and that is also that the way you can decide on your strategy, on your budget, is very different in the different institutions. You have different ways of communication, you have different ways of engaging with the community and setting the priorities, and that means also different ways of how you can bring this into the alliance and into the governance. Then some indicators on financial autonomy, also a very important question on how you can decide within your institution, within your systems. Again, you You can see here some indicators. Can you borrow money? Can you keep the surplus that you get from public funding? Can you own your infrastructure, your buildings? And also, can you decide on tuition fees? And there you have the information for different cohorts. Again, you see no coherent picture. In some systems, institutions can do that. In others, there are rather strong restrictions on the capacity to do that. On the next slide, you will see as well the diversity of funding sources. Again, this is about the system, so the institutional situation may look different, but also it gives already a picture that you find yourselves within the alliances in very different funding situations. So this graph shows, again, simplified, the amount of public funding that universities receive, the amount of private funding, particularly tuition fees they have, other sources, and European funding. So this is the system level perspective, but you can already see that, for example, the funding structure of French universities is very different from that one from Irish institutions, with a much larger, usually much larger percentage of public funding, and whereas in Irish institutions, there are a much larger component of funding coming through tuition fees. So that's very important to understand. Here on the next two slides, I will show you the long-term funding trends, because that's also very important how, where you come from, and maybe also where you will go to. This is data from our public funding Observatory, showing again system-level development over the last 10 years. And you see two topics of information, funding and development of student numbers. So you could see, for example, in the Netherlands, Dutch universities had a growth over the last 10 years, but you had a much stronger growth in student numbers. So that means also that you can't find yourself in a saying, okay, the growth in budget, there is also a growth in cost. Similarly in France, a small increase of funding, but also a slightly higher increase in student numbers. Hungary, the situation is very different, almost no increase over the last 10 years, and a decline in student numbers. On the next slide, you see systems that had to face quite some challenges. Ireland, on the one hand, over the last 10 years, quite a decrease in funding, at the same time an increase in student numbers, so quite a challenging situation. Spain, also strong decrease of funding over the last 10 years, although a slight decrease in student numbers. So here you can see you find yourself in very different situations, and if I do projections into the future, it's going to stay diverse. That will be clearly the case. Now, if you move now to the governance models, so I will just pick from some of the data that we collected when we analyzed 20 university alliances to find what is actually a common structure. Again, this is a simplified overview, which you are probably very familiar with anyway. But I think it's also interesting if you link this to the governance structures of the institutions, you can already see how those two work together. So usually you have a governing body that is there for the strategic development and the oversight. They can have different names. We also have different people in there, but usually it's the top leadership of institutions who sits in these bodies, and they're therefore generally policy and the long-term strategy. Then you usually have a steering and coordination body, and there you see already for the first time the challenges between the long-term aims and goals of the alliances and the kind of project steering that comes out from the Erasmus funding that you get. There already you have different groups in there, ranging from vice rector level to people from international offices or policies, And then you have a third level, which is usually dealing with management and implementation. So there is also there very often delivering on the Erasmus and other funding on those goals that they're promised, and then there are other bodies involved, external advisors, stakeholders, etc. So out of this construction, the question is, how does the governance of the institutions tie into that, and what are the related challenges? And in our study that we did, we sort of identified 7 challenges, and some of them linked to funding. The first one, and I think that is quite evident, this is a hugely complex undertaking. It's not just a project, it was said several times today. This is something very, very different from a usual Erasmus project or a Horizon project. It's much more closer to what you could see the experiences that you would find in mergers or corporations that come closer together. We did a lot of work on mergers as well. And there you have processes that last certainly over a decade for integration. I know this is not the aim, because merger you would come together in one legal entity, but the sort of streamlining of processes in the learning and teaching mission, as well as in the research mission, plus in the whole administrative processes, is very much similar to that. So therefore, the cost of sustainability is a big question, because it's a transformative process. And one of the challenges is when you move from project logic to a more long-term sustainability logic. And I think there is a big tension. On the one hand, you receive as an alliance funding from Erasmus Plus, from Horizon, and of course this has been driving to a certain extent and supporting some of the activities, but at the same time, and I think the sessions before showed this already quite nicely, it also compromises the concentration on the long term of what you deliver, because it's clear you're not going to deliver within 3 years or 6 years. It's a long-term journey, and therefore for the long term, the thinking, the constructions, the funding needs to be very different from a project logic. So that's another challenge to deal with. Another one is the role of leadership and governance in the whole construction. At the beginning, institutional leadership, and when I'm talking about leadership, that's leadership throughout the institution, not just top, but that has been very important in driving the setup. But in the future, the question is, what does it mean if you have a change in leadership, if there's a change in governance of the institutions, if there's a change subsequently priorities? So there's a certain risk for the long-term sustainability of priorities. So therefore, this needs to be thought into the long term, how you can build in something sustainable and how you can involve the right decision makers in the strategy and the governance of the institution. So that raises the questions of inclusiveness. How do you get involvement of, on the one hand, the formal bodies? So that will look like, if I take China as an example, probably very different for the University of Barcelona than for the University of Utrecht. But apart from the formal involvement, you also need to have the informal involvement of the community, because in the end, how different the decision-making structures are, you will need to have the support of the institutional community to buy into the project, and specifically to buy into the process, which is not just a project, but is a transformative process. So there you need to have the buy-in. And that leads us to the question of financial sustainability. As you've seen, you have very different funding frameworks, you have very different trajectories of your overall funding. So therefore, this is a question of how can you make this operation, this transformation sustainable, and you will have to make decisions on financial trade-offs. The question of student mobility is, for example, a different one if you have a system that relies more heavily on tuition fees than in a system where you have public funding. So that means also you need to align the alliance goals with the institutional goals. You need to have the buy-in. And lastly, that's more, I think, also an observation and probably a policy recommendation towards policymakers, that clearly the more policy objectives that are brought into the alliances from the outside the European level, the more this will deter you from concentrating on achieving the core goals. So why this is, of course, very relevant to bring this to the policy agenda, that alliances are sort of also bringing to the forefront some of the challenges of cooperation. At the same time, the time that you spend on this will go on costs on behalf of the achievement of your goals. Now let's come to the funding relations. I mean, I think you're all aware of that. And again, I'm using the example of CHARM. You have big budgets in your institutions. I didn't find one from Observatory, but usually the average on around 400 billion. This is also where larger institutions across Europe has a typical budget, to much higher numbers. So those are your institutional budgets. So what you receive from European funding, the 5 plus 2 million that you have to spread over the institutions, is 0.00% of an institutional budget. So in the bigger picture, I would say not relevant. Of course, it's relevant to kickstart that, but we have to see the relations. Then, of course, you get potentially other European funding sources that you can tie in. Of course, that's complex. But it stays also in relation of rather smaller amounts. Then there are, of course, national support that some of these alliances get, but again, very different. Some systems have been more generous. Spain put up 3 billion for the first wave, of France sort of matching. Or just recently, Ireland announced as well, around 440,000 euros. But again, that stays in smaller parts in comparison to the bigger budgets. Now, what does this mean for the financial sustainability? First of all, I think it's important to differentiate between the strategic and the more technical challenges that we have. I think in the session before, where there was the question about how do you solve IT issues, which have, of course, a process component and a financial component, and these are very important to take account of. But I think the strategic elements are very important for the long term, and I think the achievement of the goals that you have set yourself will not come through external funding. So I think that's maybe the bad news. But even if there's more funding available at European level, if you say in the next period there will be a doubling or an additional funding, it will stay in small percentages. Equally, even if at national level there's some contributions, in the end, where the money will come from is from internal sources to achieve goals. That means as well that is for the long-term sustainability really important to align the costs, sort of the understanding of the costs, what are the real costs of your activities in the long term, what are the resources that are available, and how can you achieve the goal. So you have those 3 elements, and you have to adapt on those 3 triggers, either align the goals, or increase the funding. So, but that needs to be better aligned. What is very important for the future sustainability as well, that you connect the needed resources to the added value of the alliances. Because what you have to do in the future is you need to buy in and to convince those within the institutions who decide on the strategy and who decide on the budget. And that can again be very different people within institutions. You have systems where you have basically external members who decide on the budget. Well, then you will have to provide a different added value than if you have to convince the academic community who has a say on that. So the communication aspect is very important for the financial sustainability. Again, it needs to be a strategic priority, so that alignment of the institutional priorities and the alignment of the alliance goals will be very, very important. We looked, for example, in the analysis at the 20 alliances, also at the strategic plans, and there you could see that in some of the institutions, the alliance were featuring not as a very big part of the institutional strategy. So that is also something for the future that's very important, and hence also integration in the institutional, strategic and financial planning will be key for the future. As I said, involvement of the relevant governing bodies and decision makers, but that also means reflections on, in the end, long-term commitment of the partners and the goals. So that will mean that for beyond the project, and I'm talking really more about the 10-year horizon, to have a projection. Can everyone buy into the goals in the long term? Can everyone provide the institutional resources that are needed for the long-term commitment? So while at the one hand, you need to think about solving all the technical issues, and there are so many that we have to challenge with, you also need to think about the long term and also think about long-term solutions and how to solve them to ensure the financial sustainability. Because, as I said, I don't think the solution will come from, even if it's necessary, more funding from European and national level. It will be in the long term a decision of the institutions if they think this provides added value. This is why we think we need to provide the necessary resources. So I hope I could sort of paint a picture of showing how actually governance and institutional strategy and achievement of financial sustainability of the institutions are connected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will keep the discussion to the end of the session, as previously explained. So now we will give the floor to Emily. Emily, please, you can share your presentation from your computer, or otherwise we can answer it from here.
Good morning, everybody. And first of all, great apologies that I can't be there with you this morning. It would have been very nice, and I hope you're all enjoying the time there. I'm just putting the presentation up. Can you see that well?
Yes,
is it in the right setting?
But not full screen, but we can see.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Should I start?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to present Una Europa, which is one of the alliances that was selected in the first round together with Charm EU, and we've worked with Charm EU on several topics in common, including the European degree and the role of universities in promoting sustainability and climate protection. So we're really happy to be invited here today. As you can see, we're a very large alliance of large research intensive universities across the whole of Europe, among Europe's leading research universities. We were actually 7 universities at the time of submitting our proposal to the pilot call back in 2019. And we grew to 8, including the University of Helsinki by the end of 2019. And Leiden University joined us in January of this year, which we're very excited about. And we're currently in discussion with a couple of other universities for further enlargement. Altogether, we have close to 500,000 students, so a very big student body, which of course leads to certain challenges, but we really believe that if we can work on things and manage to develop new pilots together, this can have a big impact for the European higher education area as a whole, because we're working at such a scale. So as with many alliances, our goal is really to try to create this European campus, but really focusing on the overall goal of enhancing quality of what we're doing together. And this is very important, not to try to repeat what our individual universities are doing, but only to work on things where our universities cannot manage to work alone, so benefit from the partnership. And it's very exciting because we're always focusing on future models, on things that haven't been done together, building a future campus, a future university together. What the partners of Una Europa decided very early on, already in 2018, is that they wanted to create a very sustainable European university. They were very motivated by Macron's speech, of course, by the call, the pilot call, the 5 million, the 3 years, but were very realistic, coming back to what Thomas was just saying, that this would be the tip of the iceberg and that we really needed much longer commitment and much longer funding in order to deliver the goals. So they decided to establish a legal entity to kind of pull that in, and I'll explain more about that in the coming slides. It was established in 2019 as a not-for-profit entity under Belgian law. So we have headquarters in Brussels on the Brussels campus of KU Leuven. And it's important to say that this also allowed us from the very beginning to have a very much integrated mission across all the missions of the university. So not just being pulled by one funding program, for instance, Erasmus, that tends to focus on education, and then you have Horizon, which is focusing more on research and innovation. We wanted to have a holistic approach from the very beginning. So the goals of this association were, well, the main important one is to pursue long and deep, broad and integrated cooperation across all our missions. We use the legal entity also as a means to develop joint strategies. These strategies go beyond what one single project or funding program can allow, and allow us to then see, okay, what investment do we need? Can that be invested through what the universities are doing already in a common way, or do we need to apply for different external funding or look to work with other actors? The other aims of the association are to cultivate a culture of excellence and to foster best practices, and linked to that, to contribute to the development of the higher education and research area. And obviously being based in Brussels, we have a strong role to play there. We currently have 4 full-time members of staff, which are employed by this legal entity. So in a sense, independent, but very closely connected to our partner universities. I was the first employee as Secretary General. We have a management assistant, a senior external funding officer, and a policy officer. And we also started a student intern program as well this year. For the time being, we're almost fully funded through the membership fees of the partner university, but we have had one experience of running a seed funding through some funding from the Polish National Agency. And soon, fingers crossed, we will also be able to participate as a full program in the European Universities rollout initiative under the Erasmus program. Our principles for collaboration, I think it's really important to say here that with our legal entity, we're in no means trying to create a kind of superstructure, a super university in a sense. The Una Europa Association is the glue to help the universities to work more effectively together. And our principles for working is really on the basis of subsidiarity, mutual trust, only acting where it makes sense to act together. We have very much respect for what's going on institutionally and at national level, and we try to focus on where we can add value, where the universities cannot act alone. It's very, very important, of course, that our strategies, as Thomas was alluding to, is aligned with the institutional strategies. What we do, and I will explain this towards the end of our presentation, is have a regular review of that within our structure as well, so that the partners can talk about their evolving strategies and can feed into then the strategies that we're developing in common, and vice versa. And the governance structures also have to be developed. So we started in the very beginning with our General Assembly, which is the largest decision-making body. This is where the rectors come together, but we also have university-related members so that the players from our ecosystem also have a say and a vote over what we're doing in the future. We have a board of directors, which is made up of the typically vice rectors international, but at least a delegate of the rector from each of our institutions, plus myself. And we're responsible for implementing the decisions of the General Assembly and also preparing those decisions and strategies as well. But what we have realized, of course, as we are developing our European University forward, is that our governance needs to be much more reflective of all the actors and more inclusive of all the actors that are engaged in building this university of the future. So we have already integrated a research strategy group, which is bringing together the research vice rectors. We are in the process of doing something similar as well at the level of teaching and learning. We have different experts working on our thematic themes, whether it's about ambitions for mobility, ambitions for diversity and inclusion, ambitions for research, for teaching and learning, and also for our international outlook. We make sure that we have champions around the table so that every action that we can do reflect those ambitions. But of course, we don't just want a top-down alliance. We have a structure, but what you need for a successful alliance in the future is really to build that bottom-up engagement and delivery of our academics, our professional staff and our students. So the governance structure also needs to be open to represent those views as well. And I have to say that's a work in progress, but it's something that we are delivering on in the coming months and years ahead. The legal entity, of course, allows us to be flexible as well when it comes to applying for other funding. We can do that independently of the universities, and I will go into that in more detail. But before doing so, a little caveat. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about legal entities when it comes to the European Universities Initiative and what it can and what it might do. But we do need to be mindful of the fact, like Thomas was mentioning in his presentation, the national settings, whether that's about legal frameworks, whether that's about policy frameworks, whether that's about funding frameworks, these are the most important, and that's where the competence lies when it comes to higher education. So you have to be very careful and mindful of the fact that creating a legal entity at European level won't solve necessarily all those issues that we have, making the national systems work better together. But they can be useful in terms of some of the things that I've mentioned so far, and which I will go on to present. So just very quickly, the legal entity allows us to recruit staff centrally, to build a funding strategy, and to apply for some applications for external funding. We can represent our alliance with authority, and also develop positioning towards different policies and funding. We have a joint work plan and activities, and a vision for the future. I'm going to finalize my presentation by explaining about our 2030 strategy and how we have developed that. But I think that some alliances have been interested about seed funding, because that's what we've used part of our budget to do. So we have a common pot of money, and we're able to launch calls for, in the first place, academics to put together bottom-up projects. But we're also hoping to extend this to the professional staff very soon as well. We've run actually 4 calls, which we still have open in terms of management. The first call was opened in 2019. We've always made our proposal, our call for proposals very open. So bottom-up projects. Until now, it's been small amounts of money that were given per project as a seed to get the collaboration going. But we're discussing, of course, in the future what will be the next needs. We have 39 projects running currently. They're normally a year to a year and a half in length. And as I mentioned in the very beginning, we managed to secure through our Polish partner in Krakow some funding from the Polish National Agency to run a seed funding call for Europa universities, targeting early stage career researchers in digital technologies for society. We're able to run this independently and set up an evaluation committee. This has been very useful instrument through our legal entity. Next week, we're launching a public database of all our projects. So if you're interested in finding out more about those, you can find them on our website. And just to finalize on the 2030 strategy, because I think this also comes back to some of the points that were raised by Thomas in his presentation. So our partners decided that we wanted to have a vision for the next 10 years. And they also, our board made the conscious decision not to align this 100% with the timeline of the rollout proposal. We knew that the rollout proposal, the rollout opportunity would give us a unique opportunity to further many of the things that we wanted to work on. But calls for proposals always come with strings attached, certain policy objectives that push you in certain directions, and certainly funding constraints. And so the 2030 strategy was our opportunity to dream without those funding restraints, without those kind of policy, and to see, okay, what can we then do in our rollout, and what would we like to do over and beyond, and then what do we need financially to be able to invest in that. And we decided to take a full year to develop this strategy. So it was launched in May of last year at our General Assembly, and we used the whole of the spring period as an online consultation with our community across our campuses to collect ideas on what they wanted to see Europa develop. Then in the summer and autumn period, we had a reflection at the level of our 8 institutions at that time. So they reflected on, okay, how does Una Europa align with our strategies locally? Where are our strategies going in the future? And where would we like to see Una Europa also aligning with that? And then we also had our strategic groups within Una Europa giving the same reflection in the field of research. What do the students want? What do the academics want in the field of diversity? How do we tackle quality assurance? All these kind of topics. And we brought that together in a General Assembly together with our external advisors last November. All different pitches came in. And we're now in the process of finalizing the writing period of our 2030 strategy. And so we will see a distinct part which can be delivered through our rollout proposal, which we have baptized Una Universitas, and everything else that will be needed that doesn't quite fit in that proposal moving forward. And we hope to be able to install a review of this so that every couple of years, at least, we can have a reporting structure, but also the universities feeding in on how they would like it to develop and how it's impacting on them as well. So I would like to leave you with those thoughts, and I'd be very happy to take any questions a bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily. So now we move to the third presentation. Okay, so we move to presentation by Bern. So Bern, if you are ready, you can share your screen. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. I hope the connection is good and that you can see me and hear me well, both on site in Montpellier, but also remotely. I'm trying to enlarge this. I hope you can see it well now, my presentation. Yeah, very happy to join the session. I would, of course, also have loved to be with you there in person, but after all, digital possibilities, make it sometimes easy to join in when you cannot travel. And so I'm happy to be part of this discussion this way. And thank you very much already for the very inspiring presentations of Thomas and Emily. I've already noted a lot and taken with me a couple of questions or things that I need to look up. I must admit that some of the categories that Thomas presented, I'm not perfectly sure that I know everything about my member universities myself, that about the organizational autonomy, governance structures, and so forth. So a few things, a little homework to do there. What I would like to bring in with my presentation is somewhat something like an outside view, because our University Alliance, UCOR, the European campus, is not a part of the European University Initiative. So we are, yes, we are very similar, and I have seen a lot of similarities also with the activities that Emily described, but we are not operating in the framework of the European University Initiative because we have a regional approach. We are a border region university network, and that brings with it a couple of constraints, but also maybe additional possibilities which play into the question of how we try and how we can assure financial sustainability, even not being funded under the European University Initiative. So just to give you a little bit of geographical context, we are, as I said, a regional network. On the left side of the slide, you can see the 3 countries, Germany, France, and Switzerland. And the region where these 3 countries actually meet is the Upper Rhine region, connected by the Rhine River. And parts of this joint territory is in the 3 countries. And this region, this border region, also has its own structure beyond science or universities or higher education. It's called the Trinational Metropolitan Region of the Upper Rhine. And it's actually an attempt to really bring together all parts of society, politics, economics, higher education, to come to some kind of a cohesion and integration in this border region, despite the national borders that we have. And of course, our borders are somewhat interesting in the sense that we also have an EU outside border towards Switzerland. On the right side of the slide, you see a little bit of a bigger map, which shows the sites of our member universities within this region. The large blue dots are our member universities. And you can see that we have 2 of them in Germany, 2 in France with 3 sites and 1 in Switzerland, all after all quite close to each other. The average distance from one member university to another is about 100 kilometers. So from the very beginning, the idea of this network, even though it is cross-border and European, has also been to take advantage of the closeness and take advantage of the fact that we belong to one region to cooperate on this basis. These are the 5 member universities that we have. And as you can see down below, our cooperation with these 5 universities and in our region is quite old. We have already been cooperating under this label UCOR since 1989. But most of the history was rather an informal network of universities where university presidents met from time to time and a couple of activities were going on. But we came to a new level in 2016 when we created a legal entity. And as you can see, this was before Macron's speech and before the start of the European University Initiative. And at the time, we decided to become a European grouping of territorial cooperation, EGTC, which is an instrument which has been created only, I think, in something around 2008, 2009, in the context of territorial cooperation. And it is an instrument which usually Europe-wide is used by municipalities, by districts, by regions, by more territorial entities. And the innovation, so to speak, the organizational innovation that we did in 2016 is to create the first European grouping of territorial cooperation made up of universities, because there was no similar legal entity on the European level that we could have used. And that is what we have opted for. I don't want to go too much into the details, but picking up this sort of trade-off between European and national level, I think we all, with the experience that we've had since 2016, we have seen that it is, of course, an advantage to have a European legal entity under European law. But at the same time, it is something which national authorities and national structures find more difficult to understand because they're not used to it. So if we approach a national authority in France or in Germany with a legal question, with an administrative question, then they usually get nervous because they say, oh, you are an EGTC. This is something we have not so much experience with. It's under European law. And that makes it sometimes a bit harder to come to practical solutions in everyday life. And I think it will take some time for this EGTC legal status to be more familiarized, or for the national authorities to become more familiarized with it. Now, one particularity, I told you we are not part of the European University Initiative, but at the same time, we have a very close relationship to one of the European university networks, to EPICUR. And as you can see, there is quite an overlap of the members. UCOR has 5 members, but 4 of them, those in France and in Germany, Karlsruhe, Strasbourg, Freiburg, and the University de Haute-Alsace are also members of the EPICUR European University. And this has to do with the fact that when the whole European University Initiative started and when criteria weren't so clear yet or were still in discussion, there was, of course, an internal discussion of whether UCOR could become a European university. And then it turned out that given the fact that we are a regional network and we don't reach out to all parts of Europe, and also with Basel as a Swiss member, we were not able to apply in our traditional format. And then 4 out of these UCOR members said, okay, we can join a larger network and become a European university. And now we have this, this overlap, and luckily it has also resulted quite recently in the fact that UCOR, the regional version of our network, so to speak, has become an associated member of EPICUR. And we hope that both approaches, both models, the more regional one, the Europe-wide one, can complement each other and can also lead to cooperation, to complementarity that we can both profit on in the context of this association. Now, just very briefly concerning strategy, we also have a strategy as UCOR, which has been adopted in 2019. And the core, so to speak, of this strategy is the definition of 4 focus areas, which will be developed or which are being developed in teaching, in research, and also in transfer activities around the areas of quantum sciences and technology, personalized health, precision medicine, sustainability, and European identities. And the member universities that we have, each of them has what we call in French pilotage, the responsibility for one of these focus areas and trying to coordinate the efforts that are going on in this field. Now, let's take a closer look at financial sustainability, because that is the core subject. And I will walk you through a couple of aspects of that. The first aspect here, the basics of our financial management, is that we have a membership fee of, in total, about 300,000 euros. This comes directly from the member university's budget. It's not co-funded by European money, so that means it's about 60,000 euros per university on average. But there is a special mechanism that it is calculated, the exact amount per university is calculated depending on student numbers. Then in-kind contributions, of course, as a network and as an EGTC, as our own legal entity, we can still rely on the possibility to use member facilities. I am now in an office of the University of Freiburg using facilities and the technical equipment of the University of Freiburg, even though I'm not directly working for them in a legal sense. So we have this possibility, and it's of course important, because if you have to start everything from scratch, build up your own premises, your own equipment, your own personal management, that is more complicated, and we are happy about this possibility to draw on our member universities, both here in Freiburg on the German side, but also in Strasbourg in France. I already mentioned the legal status, European Grouping of Territorial Cooperation. It has advantages. We have an autonomous financial management. We have the possibility to apply for funding independently, but we also see some kind of a trade-off there, that the more autonomous you are, the less help you can ask for in a way. And there have also been a couple of issues where, in direct contact with our member universities, we have received the answer, yes, we would like to offer you this possibility, or to give you the possibility to use this or this resource, but at the same time, you are not legally speaking part of our university, so we cannot, because we are not entitled to offer, to grant you access to this or that. So in detail, it's still, we're still working on how to find this. Seed money, much like what Emily also has said, we also have an instrument which started in 2017, annual budget of 300,000 euros, comes from the member universities. So in a way, it's a second membership fee. The membership fee is sort of double. The first 300,000 for the general functioning, the second 300,000 for this seed money call. And we have one call per year, certain criteria. And since the first call in 2017, we have been able to fund 41 projects in research, in teaching, all across different disciplines. And of course, the hope, and that's why this is a contribution to financial sustainability, is that further funding opportunities come afterwards, and that the seed money will bring the possibility to attract further funding. EU funding, even though we are not a European university network, is important, and I've used somewhat of a color code here. The red examples are Erasmus funding in the field of education. There is, of course, Erasmus mobility between the member universities, which is funded. We have been part in Erasmus cooperation projects, for example, one project which was called European Cross-Border Skills. The green color code is research and Horizon 2020. There is joint participation of member universities in Horizon projects, but this is something at the same time which we are not always absolutely aware of, because it's something which works autonomously between 2 or 3 member university. But we have also been able to attract money as an EGTC, as a mono beneficiary. And the third area or theater in which we can receive EU funding is Interreg, is the territorial cooperation, because Interreg is focusing on border regions. And this is probably a funding possibility that many European university networks do not have, and where our regional approach is simply opening an additional possibility for EU funding. The largest projects that we've been able to gain, and which we run ourselves as a European grouping of territorial cooperation, are Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, co-fund actions, with which we established doctoral schools, doctoral programs. And this is, of course, in line with the focus areas that we've defined so far. You can see quantum sciences and technology again. We have been able to fill 37 PhD positions with people from all over the world at our different member institutions. And we are now doing the same with an immunology doctoral program, which is, of course, contributing to our focus area of personalized health and precision medicine. So this has been a very successful possibility for us to attract European funding, which directly helps us to develop our strategic focus areas. And we will see how this journey continues. Interreg, Upper Rhine, this regional funding, this is something which has helped us in the period from 2016 to 2019 to develop our strategy. This was a project called EUCOR, the European Campus Cross-Border Structures. But we also have a particular sustainability cluster, which has run quite a number of different Interreg projects related to questions of sustainability. And of course, the area of sustainability is very well adapted to this regional approach, because you can always look at the region as sort of an object of research and an object for, or an area where you want to create innovation in the field of renewable energies, mobility, energy consumption, water quality. And that's also why we think the sustainability is a good focus area for us as a regional network. Another particularity, even though we are trinational, and that's of course important to us, our president is from Switzerland, from Basel, we are still very much linked to this special German-French relationship. Germany and France have created many bilateral institutions and programs over the past decade. And as you know, there is the German-French University, which is a funding agency which already exists since 1999 and is funding mainly bi- or trinational study courses between German and French universities with additional partners from other countries. And many of the joint study courses that we actually have between our member universities receive this kind of funding. And also we have now run a particular project on the innovation region Fessenheim. Fessenheim is this nuclear power plant which has just been shut down, and we are trying to develop a vision of how a region can develop in the post-nuclear area and evolve or develop future technologies that are climate neutral. And for this, we have also received German-French funding. So this is, of course, a particularity which doesn't work in other areas, but for us, it's an advantage to simply have an additional arena of funding that we can be active in. Okay, I've tried to sort of concentrate what I've been saying so far in this SWOT analysis. So what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats when it comes to financial sustainability? And I think our strengths are, we have a strong membership base, a long tradition. We have this legal status. We have a large diversity of funding options that I walked you through. And we have a steady growth of funding since 2016. In 2016, we basically only started out with the membership fees, and then all these additional projects sort of came in addition. And so that's a success story. But of course, at the same time, you never know how this continues. We have some weaknesses. As I said, we have no access to European University Initiative funding. That would, of course, in some cases be helpful. We have a limited geographical scope, so our area of cooperation is only our trinational region. And we have limited human resources for financial management. I mean, the more projects that you manage, the more complicated it gets. And we simply notice that it is getting difficult for us to really assure this financial management, and we need to invest more resources from our membership fees to have the personnel which can deal with it. And we have limited business cooperation so far, but we hope to develop on that as well. Opportunities, we have good EU funding experiences to build on, so we hope to continue on this area. We have this German-French special relationship. We have our particular regional context of cross-border cooperation. We have what I call Green Deal compatibility. A lot of things that we do really are very much in line with Green Deal objectives. And we have synergy competence in the sense that we have quite practically been able to put together or bring together different European funding, different European instruments for our cooperation, like, for example, the EGTC instrument or also the other funding. And threats, I mean, you never know. We might be less successful in attracting funding. Maybe these two big projects that we managed to achieve we will not be able to repeat that so quickly. We might run into financial management complications if we are too busy on too many different projects. Unclear project sustainability. Of course, you never really know what are we going to do in the field of our doctoral program in quantum sciences once the project has ended. How can we continue? Member disengagement. Of course, this was also mentioned before. You never really know how the priorities of each member shifts, but then at the same time, with this long-standing tradition, we're quite confident that our members will not leave us, but they might, of course, be more or less engaged in what we do. And we have this complicated situation with EU-Switzerland relations, the University of Basel in Switzerland having a lot of uncertainty right now about the possibility to participate in Horizon projects in the future. The prospect of joining Erasmus is not quite clear. And that, of course, is detrimental to our ambition to be active and successful on the European scene. Ja, I hope I wasn't too long, and danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Merci de votre attention, to use our native languages here in the Upper Rhine, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank the three speakers for their very interesting presentations and also for adjusting the time. Even if they have been very Germanic from that perspective, I know that Emily will run out of time quite soon. So Emily, I will just start my presentation, and in case you have to leave, please feel free to do it. We have comments for you, we'll send it by email. In case you can stay, we'll be more than happy to have you with us. So let's start. I would like just to give you some brief information about CHARM. CHARM-EU is also an European University Alliance, as in the case of Europa, that is formed by 5 universities at this moment. And these 5 universities are Montpellier, Trinity College Dublin, Elf University, and then we also have Utrecht University. Okay, and we are now in a part of the University of Barcelona. And then we are also expanding, and we have already joined for this rollout that will start with soon. 3 additional universities, 2 German universities. We have here 1 representative from Aarhus University, and we are very happy to have Toris here with us. We also have Abo Academy from Finland, and then 1 additional university, which was in fact associate partners in this meeting. Okay, so for today's session, as you can hear, was about financial sustainability. So I thought you would like also to relate a bit what I want to explain with previous presentations. And I found very interesting the part by Thomas regarding the 7 challenges. There are 3 challenges that were very present in our discussion at CHAMU. The first one, resource allocation. The second one, inclusiveness. And the third one, which is the one that we are more worried at this stage, is moving from the project to long-run sustainability. Okay, so from that perspective, the insights that Thomas gave us about the different dimensions that were relevant from that perspective have been very useful for me. Also, Thomas just put also the focus on the fact that the contributions from the EU, both from Erasmus Plus project, but also from the SWAPS project that we have from the Age 2020 project, are very minor contributions, both in terms of our own budget, but also in terms of our goals that are very ambitious, but these are the goals that were required by the Commission at that stage. So I think that is also worth mentioning that. And from Emily's and her presentation, I would highlight that we also are committed to this idea of providing high quality services, high quality research also, and at the same time being complementary what we already have in our university. So this is more or less the main idea. So moving to these 2 legal entities, or these 2 models that we have been presented today, is something that we also have in mind. We have explored different possibilities, but this is something that of course will come at a later stage. But we are convinced that, and we also share this view, that the flexibility that these legal entities models offer compared to what we already have, it's very interesting for us to develop new issues. From that perspective, we have not worked yet in this idea of a seed-funded project. I found the 2 models that have been presented today very interesting. This is, in fact, more related to what we are doing in our TORCH project, the SWAP project that I mentioned that at this stage from the Erasmus Plus, but this is very interesting. But we also share some approach to what we have been told today about how they work. For instance, and the General Manager of our Alliance can explain about how we created the joint virtual administrative office that in fact is having some common resources, shared resources on the different areas. Okay, so we are also on the way of doing this kind of thing. So let me just go to the next, please. Introduce what is our most challenging action within the CHAMU project at this stage, which is our Masters in Global Challenges for Sustainability. This is something that lies in work package 7 of our original project, which is pilot, which is very general title, but at the end, this is where most of our resources, not only financial, but also human, and most of our efforts have come. And the idea is that doing this master has represented also a challenge from different perspectives. If you were attending this morning the student session, or you have heard about that, if you were in the quality session, they are talking about that. Here in finance, we're also talking about. So our tasks within the finance group under the management and the governance work packages in the CHAMU project were covering these objectives, these topics, and these points. Okay, you can see that they are very focused to the kind of issues that are part of this master. For instance, how to set tuition fees, how to introduce different grant schemes, how, this in terms of topics, but in terms of policies, okay, how do we establish the budget for the master, how do we establish the tuition fees, what is our refund and cancellation policies. So we can go to the next. So you can see that this has been a dynamic process where the 3 different policies have been developed coming into the, let's say, the same objective. The master is now ending into the 3rd phase, between the 2nd and the 3rd. Okay, so everything had to be decided quite soon. And so the first year of the project was also trying not only to generate the academic content and the mobility schemes of the master, but also try to think of how we were going to approach several issues. Okay, so as I want to have some time for discussion, let me go directly to the focus. Okay, so for instance, tuition fees. Here, Thomas provided us with a very interesting comparative of the current situation in the 5 countries that were involved in the master. Okay, and it was very clear that the policy in Spain is not the same that in France. Our French colleagues here know, because they have been very, very innovative from that perspective, trying to solve the problem that we had. But one decision that was very important at that stage is that tuition fees were going to be identical across institutions. Okay, so all the students that were following our master will pay exactly the same, with the only distinction between those that were coming from a new country or they were coming from outside Europe. As I told you, we also wanted to keep a very high standard in terms of quality, but at the same time, keeping some tuition fees that are part of being aligned with legal frameworks that were comparable with similar products in the educational realm. Okay, so that at the end, students were paying an appropriate price for what they were receiving compared to other similar products. Let me say, however, that there is no similar master at the moment in Europe. But in any way, of course, in that aspect, that the prices were affordable and that we were inclusive was also a very important axis. And we don't have here Agnes or Zoltan, but we have other colleagues from ELTE that were leading this work package. And in fact, in the afternoon, we have one session on that. And this is something that has been very important for us. Also, we wanted to be very transparent in the way we establish fees and also how these fees were going to evolve. And we include some kind of self-constraint in the sense that we were not going to increase our fees more than 3–5% per year for the same educational product. Of course, this was a decision adopted with an inflation scenario of 2%. Now things have changed, but we hope that we will be able to keep to that agreement. And of course, all these decisions have to be taken into account in terms of the long-run financial sustainability of the master at this case, but in any educational action that we take together. Then when the master started and we started to receive applications and we started to admit the students, some of them started to ask about, okay, what would happen if I don't get the visa? What would happen if I cannot come due to COVID? What would happen for any other situation? So we have to start thinking about this refined cancellation policy. And again, all legislations are very different, national, but also our own institutions have different policies regarding that. So it was very easy, however, to arrive to some kind of agreement about what were the policies that we have to be very transparent from the very beginning for the students in order to deal with that. But it has been also something that took some time for us. At the end, national legislations here are, as Thomas explained, very different. But however, let me add, and this is also related to Maniche's work, that we have been quite successful in trying to, let's say, overcome some barriers that were present at this time. So coming to the issue of inclusivity, and here we had a debate, internal debate, of whether we should attend all, let's say, demands of the students that were having similar conditions, economic, personal, however, taking into account that we have limited resources at that stage. So the idea here is, okay, we fix some eligibility criteria, and we have several students that fulfill this criteria, but we don't have enough money to cover that. What can we do in that case? So at the beginning, we established a limit of 5% total students in order to give a grant. We established a program of total, let's say, grants in the sense that they will cover not only tuition fees but also mobility. We established some partial reductions in some specific situations, but at the end the reality was that this limit didn't apply because all universities were wise enough to give some additional money so that every student that was really interested to come and join the program had the possibility of doing that. But as my academic background is economist, we all know that this is not really sustainable in the long run. We cannot attend all these, so we need to establish some rules and we need to make some priority decision. But this was the pilot, and we didn't want to get anybody outside because we are also trying to promote diversity and then to see how our different universities can cooperate in this, as I told you before, complementarity way to other educational activities. So this is the part for the students. But what about teaching? At the end, we all know that when we start an educational program, we need to plan all the actions and we need to take into account what is going to be the cost of that program. Okay, so we have some initial planning. this initial planning was very well done. And here Jan can explain the details, that it has been also 54 from this side. It was very well thought and it was really innovative, okay? And this is also part of the added value that the Alliance is giving to our universities. We can learn from best practices in the different universities and then apply it internally. But at the end, there were some deviations before the course starts with this idea of high quality, okay? So at the end, these deviations implied more teaching hours, highly new staff, and apart of that, there have been deviations during the course because we have different thematic areas, different tracks, and the students were not distributed across between these different tracks in the way we expect. Deviations were not very difficult to manage, but it created some financial imbalance from our initial. So our reflections on that point is that we need monitoring indicators that can allow us to follow in real time what is happening. The problem, and this is related to our first session this morning, related to IT, is that we don't have proper financial indicators, or information systems are not prepared to exchange this kind of information in a very efficient way. Okay, so this is something that we will need also to develop in the future. So IT is not only relevant for the educational part, but also for the management of our different areas. Okay, now the first edition, as I told you, is on its way, but we are now working in the next edition. We are learning from the previous experience in order to try to improve the situation. At the end, we have students, we have our costs related to the master, but at the end, in order to do a budget, you also need to make some initial forecasts about demand. And here, our initial forecasts were quite good in terms of capacity that we had to attract the students to our master, but there were some deviations between EU and non-EU that can actually be attributed to the situation related to the pandemic, but at the end, this created also some financial imbalance from what we already expected, because the fees were very different from the two types of the students. At the end, this is something that was solved, but it's a very important issue when we plan new actions into the future. Okay, so in order to summarize what we already have, we are on its way. This is just a pilot experience, but I think that we can learn from this pilot experience that in order to ensure long-run financial sustainability of the Alliance as a whole, but also, we don't need that every product that we have is financially sustainable, but they cannot be creating a big problem from the financial perspective. So that we need to establish some kind of risk-sharing mechanism between the different products, so that we can cover some surplus that we have, so that the surplus in some products can help to cover the deficits in others, but also between the different members of the Alliance. And this is what we are working now, and we expect that this is being developed. I'll go to the next. So thank you very much. I stop here. I hope that Emily is still with us, otherwise I'm sorry that I extended too much. But then we can take questions, both, so you can stop sharing, please. We can take questions both from the audience, but also from those of you who are following us online through the chat. Okay, so thank you very much. Let's move to the second part, or the last part of the session. So any question? Who wants to be the first? So I see that Ben has raised his hand, so Ben, please, go ahead.
I was only applauding, actually. I didn't raise my hand, but I would have had a question to Emily, but she left us. She was talking about this particular possibility that she had through Polish funding, this Polish agency. And I thought it was interesting because usually there are quite some restrictions in place when you use when you want to use money that comes from a national source for a European corporation. So I would have been interested to hear how she can actually use this Polish money to the benefit of the whole European University Alliance. And I will pick up the issue with her bilaterally afterwards. But maybe this is something which is also relevant for other participants or alliances.
So, please.
Question for Thomas. Thomas, you showed us the very different financial positions the educational systems across Europe, but we're meant to have this unified structure in the European university initiatives and alliances deliver the same services and be interoperable. So I'm just wondering, do you think that is a fundamental challenge for the European university initiatives? And if you have any suggestions on how we might kind of address that?
Well, thanks for the question. I think the different funding systems and frameworks, they're going to stay. I mean, and they're constantly also under reform. So I think you need to look at solutions to overcome that. I think the example on the tuition fees is one already that certainly I think one of the bigger challenges, because that will stay diverse and that will sometimes change as well. So they need to find some solutions. So that's why I think it's also already popped up in some questions. Where can you find solutions? Will be a legal entity solution to something. Yes, you might be able through a legal entity to apply commonly to projects, or you might also fund jointly some resources. But then it's the other question, is the effort to set up such a legal entity worth the added value? And I think that we need to be very much aware of that. So it's always the question of what is the best path to achieve a certain solution through these different elements. And I think sometimes there is still a lot of hope of finding through construction a solution to something that will not come from that. So and also, of course, there's a high policy interest, and of course the European Commission and the different member states are aware of these diversities. And again, the question is of where the sort of mobility, where you can find solutions if the member states work together. That's clearly something where say, okay, knowledge management degrees and all these kind of things there, you will have something on that level. But the diversity of the funding systems, that will essentially stay there. So I think with that assumption you have to work. And what we suggest as well is maybe sort of with these challenges, sort of make a matrix of where say, okay, what are the challenges that where potentially a joint European solution will solve something? Joint European solution in that sense is that the member states change something in their higher education system, so that makes it easier. Where is a solution where this is not an option, and where there's a solution where, I don't know, a legal entity will help to overcome some of those challenges.
Yes, Thomas, you also mentioned about funding internal resources. What I was wondering, and it's also what we discussed about in the China U organization, that what we are working on is finding new ways of education. See China U as a testbed university where we can learn from, and working together with this alliance, we actually can accelerate change, which we cannot do by ourselves in our own university. So that can be an added value, because that means maybe investment, but it will give some benefit, not for the child, but also for the own university and transformation within our own university. And then another thing is that where the European Committee is talking about the funding, not only the funding of the European universities, but also putting out other calls on Erasmus or Horizon Plus, where European universities can apply with proposals, where the European Committee says, well, if a European university is applying, they will get some benefits. Maybe a better way of, or a better possibility for getting funds. So that can also be some other way of getting funding through the European alliances for the collaboration and the benefits. And a third way of funding or the sustainable financial situation is what we discussed this morning about the IT collaboration, because we know that IT is costs a lot of money in all of our universities, and when we can join forces on the digitalization and IT, that can be reducing costs for that specific part if we collaborate on that and work together, and not only within the alliances, but maybe broader with the other alliances. How do you see this? Are those topics we need to take into account for the sustainable funding for these alliances?
I think, I mean, these are very, very core questions and very good reflections. Maybe if I take three of them. The first one, I think, is the cooperation aspect, and that can create in itself efficiencies. So this is something we've run a project that was looking at efficiency, effectiveness in higher education institutions. And there, one of the things that came out that in general collaboration, there is still something to get out of efficiencies and effectiveness from collaborating, from sharing your infrastructure, from all these kind of things. You don't need to buy big equipment just for yourself. Of course, cross-national, that's an additional challenge. So far, I mean, if there have been collaborations, very often this has been done on a national level, or also groupings of universities. So therefore, I think there is certainly an opportunity to think about, okay, how can we also use our resources together? But that requires, again, an alignment of the strategy. So, I mean, I think there was certain topics when you say, okay, you're talking about, we'll have a priority area in quantum physics, for example. Quantum physics requires a lot of investment in certain infrastructure and tools. There you can join resources. You can join resources. Of course, there are technical questions. How do you finance across borders and etc. But essentially, I think in long term, there is an added value that will sort of provide you with your sort of better spending of your resources, of getting more out of it for the benefit of the alliances. So I think that's one point. The second one, I think in order to increase the different use of funds, I think we had a good example, I think Bernd showed it, how they managed to get the different European sources, regional ones, how together, but that requires an enormous amount of knowledge to understand how the different application systems work out. So that requires, in a sense as well, investment into this knowledge. But again, I think there are opportunities, because, for example, in some of your partner universities, you will have a bigger knowledge how to get funding from structural funds. Others might have a huge office that are very successful in getting Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020 funding. So again, there it's about how can you use those knowledge and the resources that you have in your partner institutions for the achievement of joint goals. And the last point, the third one, having hopes that you will get an advantage of European funding as an alliance to get more than if you're not in alliance, I'm very skeptical about that, because that is, of course, something that there is a specific call for that if you have a specific purpose. But let's say for Horizon Europe funding, that you will get an advantage if you're in alliance. I don't think so that this will help.
Okay. In case there is no more questions, I think that we are out of time. So I would like to thank you all the attendees, but specifically all the speakers. So thank you very much. Now we have time for lunch. So thank you very much.